The first time my mailbox was destroyed, I thought it was an accident. Maybe a delivery truck backed into it, or a group of kids thought it'd be funny to knock it over. Out here, on the outskirts of our quiet little town in rural Kentucky, you learn not to take small things too seriously. People drove too fast on the gravel road that wound past my property, and every now and then, someone's bumper kissed a fence post or a trash bin. So when I found my wooden mailbox lying flat in the mud that first morning, I cursed under my breath, cleaned up the mess, and built a new one that afternoon. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple wooden post with a red flag and my name stenciled on the side. J. Miller. My wife, Sarah, had painted it years ago, back when she was alive. Even though she'd been gone 3 years now, I kept the same lettering. It reminded me of her handwriting. Neat, soft, perfectly balanced. That mailbox was more than a box for letters. It was one of the last little pieces of her that still stood. So when it happened again the following week, I knew it wasn't an accident. The new post was ripped clean from the ground, splinters scattered down the ditch. The door was bent, crushed in the middle, like something heavy had slammed right into it. I stood there in the early light, heart thudding, staring at the damage. That wasn't a truck grazing the corner. It was deliberate. I called the sheriff's office, but they didn't seem too concerned. Probably some bored teenager, the deputy said over the phone. You know how it is out here. We'll make a note of it. That was it. A note. By the third week, I replaced the mailbox again, this time using thicker wood, reinforced with bolts. But I woke the next morning to find it reduced to rubble. My security camera, an old motion sensor type that hadn't been updated since 2012, caught only a brief flicker of headlights and a shadowy figure swinging what looked like a metal bat. That's when I saw her. The figure wasn't a teenager. She was shorter, maybe mid-40s, wearing a gray hoodie. When she stepped into the headlight beam, her hair caught the light, fiery red. I paused the video and squinted closer. I recognized her instantly. Karen Harper. She lived 3 houses down the road. Her property bordered mine on the west side, separated by a small fence and a strip of wild blackberry bushes. We'd never gotten along. She'd been a problem since the day I moved in, filing noise complaints about my tractor, accusing me of encroaching when I trimmed the shared fence line, even yelling once because my dog had barked at her cat. She was the kind of neighbor that smiled to your face and called the county inspector the minute you turned your back. But smash in my mailbox? That was new, even for her. I tried to be reasonable. The next morning, I walked down to her driveway, calm as I could be, and knocked on her door. No answer. Her blinds twitched, though, and I knew she saw me standing there. All right, I muttered under my breath. Have it your way. I spent the next few days rebuilding my mailbox again, but this time, I wasn't aiming for pretty. I was aiming for permanent. I went down to the local scrap yard and found a thick steel pipe, about 6 inches in diameter. It weighed close to 50 pounds and looked like something that belonged in a construction site, not a front yard. I welded it onto a concrete base, sunk it 3 feet deep, and filled the inside with gravel before sealing it with quickset cement. The box itself was solid steel too, thick enough to withstand a sledgehammer. When I was done, I stood back and admired it. It gleamed under the sun like a small fortress. The red flag still lifted smoothly, but everything else looked industrial, unyielding. My little tribute to Sarah had now turned into a silent dare. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, waiting. The air was cool, and the crickets were loud. Out here, sound carried far, every crunch of gravel, every hum of an engine. Around midnight, I heard the faint rumble of a car slowing down at the end of the road. Headlights flickered between the trees. I turned off the porch light and waited. The car idled for a moment, then rolled closer. My pulse quickened. I recognized the dull whine of her old Honda Civic. The car stopped right by my mailbox. Through the darkness, I saw her get out, metal bat glinting under the moonlight. She raised it once, then swung with all her strength. The sound that followed wasn't the satisfying crack of which she expected. It was a clunk, a sharp metallic echo that rang through the night like a bell. The bat bounced off the steel surface, and she staggered back, clutching her wrist. I couldn't help it. I laughed. Out loud. She froze, spinning toward my porch, eyes wide. Having fun, Karen? I called, stepping into the light. Her face twisted with fury. You can't just what? I said, walking closer. Build my own mailbox. On my property. She hesitated, then scurried back to her car, muttering something under her breath. The engine roared, tires spat gravel, and she tore off into the night. I thought that would be the end of it. But I underestimated how far a bitter person will go when pride's on the line. The next morning, I found my steel mailbox still standing, completely untouched, but the fence along my property had been cut. My trash cans were tipped over, and someone had poured something into my flower beds that smelled like bleach. It wasn't about the mailbox anymore. She wanted a war. I called the sheriff again the next morning, explaining what had happened, the vandalism, the cut fence, the chemical smell in my garden. The dispatcher sounded the same as before, bored and unconcerned. Do you have any proof it was her, Mr. Miller? I have video of her smashing my mailbox last night. Can you identify her clearly? Clear enough. She sighed. Well, bring it in, and we'll take a look. I drove into town that afternoon with a USB stick containing the footage. The sheriff himself, old Hank Dalton, squinted at the blurry night recording on his computer screen. He scratched his gray beard, shrugged, and said, "Hard to say that's her for sure. Could be anyone with red hair and a bat." I leaned forward. You know damn well who that is. Maybe so, he said slowly, but unless she confesses, there's not much I can do. Property damage like that is a misdemeanor, and she'll just deny it. So, what? She gets away with it? He looked me in the eye, tired but sympathetic. Sometimes the best thing you can do is ignore folks like her. They'll get bored eventually. But Karen Harper wasn't the kind of person who got bored. She was the kind who got even. A few days passed quietly. Too quietly. I replaced the ruined flowers, patched the fence, and tried to focus on work. I run a small custom wood shop out of my barn, handcrafted furniture mostly. The smell of cedar and varnish usually calmed me, but lately every little sound outside set my nerves on edge. Then came the night of the headlights. It was just after 11. I was finishing up some sanding when I saw a bright light sweep across my yard through the window. Headlights, slow-moving, creeping up my driveway. My hands went cold. I killed the workshop lights and moved to the window. The same Honda Civic rolled to a stop near my porch. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. Karen got out, looked straight at my house, and smiled. A nasty, deliberate smile that sent a chill through me. Then she opened the trunk. She pulled out a small red canister. Gasoline. My heart slammed against my ribs. I was already grabbing my phone when she walked toward my flower beds, unscrewed the cap, and poured the fuel out in a thin line along the grass. The air filled with a sharp reek of gasoline. I burst through the door before she could strike a match. "Karen," I shouted. She froze, startled, then dropped the can. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The moon casting long shadows between us, the smell of fuel heavy in the air. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I yelled. She straightened, her face twisted into something almost triumphant. "You think you can humiliate me like that? That stupid mailbox stunt? Everyone in the neighborhood is laughing at me because of you." I stepped closer. "You brought that on yourself." Her hands shook, but her voice rose. "You've been harassing me for years, your dog, your noise, your fence. I'm sick of you." She took a step back, eyes darting to the car. I realized she wasn't going to light the fire after all. She'd only wanted to scare me. Still, I wasn't letting her walk away from this one. "I've got everything on camera," I said quietly. "This time you're done." She hesitated, then spat at the ground and climbed back into her car. Tires screeched, gravel flew, and she sped off down the road. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room, shotgun across my lap, waiting for another engine to appear. None did. But at dawn, when I walked outside, I saw the gasoline had killed a long strip of grass right down the edge of my yard. A scar, black and ugly. That was the moment something in me hardened. I'd spent months trying to be the reasonable neighbor, the polite man who handled things the right way. But the right way wasn't working. People like Karen didn't stop until you gave them a reason to. So I gave her one. The plan started simple. I upgraded my cameras, 4 new motion sensor models with night vision and cloud backup. I mounted them high, disguised under the eaves, and near the fence line. Then I installed motion lights along the driveway and a hidden alarm inside the mailbox itself, one that sent a ping straight to my phone whenever it was disturbed. For a week, nothing happened. Then, on Friday night, the alert came through. Mailbox tampering detected. I jumped off the couch and ran to the window. Headlights again, slicing through the dark. Karen was back, and this time she wasn't alone. Someone was in the passenger seat. I couldn't make out the face, but the figure was holding something, a sledgehammer. I hit record on the live camera feed and grabbed my coat. I didn't plan to fight them, just to confront them with evidence. But before I could step outside, the hammer swung.
Clang, clang.
The sound was deafening, metallic, sparks flying under the headlights. My steel mailbox barely shuddered, but the guy swinging the hammer yelled in pain, clutching his arm. Karen shouted something, angry, panicked, and they both bolted back to the car. The engine revved, tires screeched, and they were gone. I walked out to inspect the damage. The mailbox was flawless. Not even a dent. But the ground around it was littered with bits of rubber, and a faint smear of blood streaked the side of the box where the man's hand must have caught. I didn't smile this time. I just turned to the camera, made sure it had caught everything, and went back inside. The next morning, I called the sheriff again and sent him the footage. 2 hours later, Hank showed up at my door. He looked more awake this time. "Mr. Miller," he said, "mind if I come in?" I nodded, and we sat at the kitchen table. He rubbed his temples. "Well, I think we've got her this time. Clear as day. Her car, her face, the weapon, everything. You sure you don't want to press charges?" "Press charges?
You mean you can do that now?"
He half smiled.
Yeah.
"The DA saw the video. That mailbox of yours might have saved us a lot of trouble." He left with a promise that Karen would be taken care of. I didn't see her for a while after that. Her house stayed dark, her car gone. I figured maybe she'd finally been arrested or scared enough to move away. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. But peace never lasts long when bitterness takes root. 3 weeks later, she came back. It was early evening when I saw her car roll past slowly, pausing in front of my mailbox. She didn't get out this time. Just sat there, staring. Our eyes met through the windshield for one long, silent moment before she drove off. That night, the storm came. Heavy rain, high winds, thunder shaking the windows. I went to bed early, exhausted, thinking the weather would keep everyone inside. But around 2 a.m., a deafening crash ripped me awake. The kind of crash that makes your stomach drop before your brain even catches up. I ran to the window and froze. The old oak tree by the road, one that had stood there for nearly a century, was now lying across my front yard, branches splintered, trunk cracked in half. And beneath it, in the beam of my security light, I saw it. My mailbox crushed under the massive trunk, bent and half buried in mud. For a long moment, I thought it was just bad luck. The storm had done what Karen couldn't. But when I walked closer, flashlight trembling in my hand, I saw something that changed everything. The base of the tree had been cut. Not by lightning, by a saw. The cut was clean, angled, deliberate, and half-burned to disguise the marks. That wasn't nature. That was sabotage. I stood there in the rain, staring at the saw-scarred base of that fallen oak, water dripping from my coat, fury rising like fire in my chest. She'd done it again. Only this time, she hadn't just smashed a mailbox. She'd risked killing me. If that tree had fallen 10 feet closer, it would have taken out my porch and bedroom. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and splintered wood. I called the sheriff, once more, voice hoarse with anger. He came out to take photos, poked around the stump and frowned. "Looks cut clean," he admitted. But without catching her in the act, it's just suspicion. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "You have 3 reports, video evidence, and now this. How much more proof do you need?"
He sighed.
"We're keeping an eye on her, I promise. But you know how it goes with property feuds. Judges hate them." After he left, I spent the day clearing debris, every swing of the axe against fallen limbs echoing my frustration. By the time the yard was clean, my arms were numb, but my mind was sharper than ever. She thought she could keep doing this, that the system would protect her.
Fine.
Then I'd protect myself another way. I went back to the workshop that night. The smell of metal, oil, and sawdust filled the air. Under the dim light of a single hanging bulb, I began rebuilding again. But this time, I wasn't just rebuilding a mailbox. I was designing a statement. I used the thickest steel plate I had, salvaged from an old tractor chassis, and welded it into a rectangular box that could have survived a car crash. The post wasn't just a pipe anymore. It was reinforced with a concrete-filled core, the same type used in highway barriers. I even bolted the whole thing to a foundation of buried steel mesh, just to make sure no one could pull it up. It took me 3 days, working between rain showers, grinding, welding, and setting the bolts deep into the ground. When I finally stood back, the mailbox gleamed like a miniature bunker. It didn't belong in a neighborhood. It belonged on a battlefield. That night, when the sky cleared and the moon returned, I sat on the porch again, waiting. Hours passed. Nothing. Another night, still nothing. Then on the third night, I saw her car. The same gray Honda Civic crept along the road, engine whispering, headlights off. She thought she was being clever. I turned off my porch light and watched. The car slowed to a crawl, stopped right beside the new mailbox and idled. She didn't get out immediately. She just sat there. Maybe she was deciding whether it was worth it. Maybe she was working up the nerve. I imagined her gripping that bat again, remembering how it had bounced uselessly off the steel. Finally, the door opened. She stepped out, hood up, something in her hand, looked like a wrench or a crowbar. She stood in front of the box for a long moment, almost like she was studying it, and then she swung.
Clang.
The sound rang through the night like a church bell. She stumbled, shaking her hand. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then she hit it again, screaming, wild, desperate. The second hit bounced back and sent her sprawling onto the gravel. That's when I turned on the spotlight. The floodlight I'd mounted on the porch exploded to life, blinding white. She froze like a deer in headlights. I stood there holding my phone, camera pointed right at her. "Smile for the camera, Karen," I said. She shielded her eyes, stumbling backward. You can't film me." "Already did." "You think this makes you the hero?" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Everyone knows you're the problem here." I stepped forward slowly. "The difference is, I have proof." Her face twisted, and she lunged toward the mailbox again, maybe out of frustration, maybe insanity. But before she could reach it, her foot caught the lip of the concrete base, and she went down hard, face first into the gravel. The sound of her cry echoed across the quiet fields. For a moment, I just watched her lying there, the once powerful neighbor now crumpled and bleeding under her own hatred. I could have walked over, helped her up, ended it peacefully. But I'd reached my limit. Instead, I called Hank again. "Sheriff," I said when he answered. "You might want to send someone over. She's here again. This time, you'll find her waiting." When the patrol car arrived 15 minutes later, its lights flashing red and blue across the trees, Karen was still on the ground, holding her wrist, cursing me under her breath. They cuffed her gently but firmly, read her rights, and drove her away.
I thought that was the end.
But endings are never that clean. A week later, I received a letter, ironically, in the mailbox. It was from her lawyer. A formal complaint accusing me of malicious harassment and psychological distress. She was suing me for emotional damage, claiming I'd built the steel mailbox specifically to cause her injury. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But the county court didn't think so. They sent me a summons, and suddenly I found myself standing in front of a judge, explaining why I'd reinforced my mailbox like Fort Knox. Karen sat at the other table, wrist in a brace, fake tears glistening under the courtroom lights. Her lawyer painted me as some paranoid recluse obsessed with booby, trapping his property. When it was my turn, I showed the videos, the vandalism, the gasoline, the sawed tree, the midnight attacks. The judge watched in silence, his face unreadable. Then he leaned back, sighed, and said, "I don't know what kind of feud this is, but it ends today. Mrs. Harper, you reordered to pay restitution for the damages and keep a 300-foot distance from Mr. Miller's property. Case closed." She glared at me as the gavel came down, her face a mix of rage and disbelief. For the first time in months, I walked out of that courtroom feeling like justice had actually worked. But the story didn't end there. The following spring, word spread through the neighborhood that Karen had sold her house. Some said she couldn't stand the embarrassment, Others whispered she was facing bankruptcy after the legal fees. I didn't care which was true. I just enjoyed the peace. One sunny afternoon, I stood by the mailbox, my unbreakable mailbox, and ran a hand along its cool steel surface. It had taken everything she could throw at it, and it still stood strong. Like me. That's when I heard the crunch of tires behind me. I turned and saw a moving truck pulling into her old driveway. A young couple stepped out, waving cheerfully. "Hey there, neighbor," the man called. "We're the Parkers." I smiled, genuinely this time. "Welcome to the neighborhood." As they unpacked boxes, the woman glanced toward my mailbox and laughed. "That's quite a mailbox you've got there." "Yeah," I said with a small grin. "Built to last." That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly. No engines on the road, no shadows outside, no alerts from the motion sensors. Just the wind in the trees and the steady hum of peace returning. Yet, as I drifted off, a part of me couldn't help remembering the lessons of those long months. The cost of silence, the price of patience, and the way hatred eats a person from the inside out. Karen had thought she could break me by destroying what I loved, but all she did was remind me who I was. A builder, not a breaker. And so, even after all the fights, the sleepless nights, the fear and the fury, I found myself quietly grateful for the steel, for the lessons, and for the peace that followed. Because sometimes, to stand your ground, you have to build something unbreakable. The first time I found my mailbox shattered, I didn't think much of it. Out here in the quiet hills of Virginia, things broke. Mailboxes got clipped by delivery trucks or snowplows. Kids with baseball bats thought it was funny to play mailbox derby. Life in the country had its rough edges, and I had learned to shrug them off. So, I replaced it that afternoon. Fresh post, new coat of paint, red flag glinting in the sun. I even stenciled my name on the side in black block letters. Tom Reed, clear as day. I stepped back and admired it. A small thing, sure, but a symbol of order in a world that sometimes refused to play fair. The next morning it was gone. Not just knocked over, obliterated. The post was split clean in half, the box flattened like it had been run over by a truck. I stood in the ditch staring at it, jaw tight. The tire tracks in the mud told the story. Someone had done this deliberately. I filed a report with a county sheriff, who promised to look into it, which was his polite way of saying he wouldn't. I knew better than to expect help out here. When you lived miles outside town, you handled your own problems. I rebuilt it again. This time I used a thicker post and a metal box. I even installed a small motion light above it, figuring maybe the extra visibility would scare off whoever thought it was funny to destroy my property. That lasted a week. The third time, I caught a glimpse of her, Karen Ellison, my neighbor from 2 lots down. Her car, a dented gray minivan, sped off just as I stepped outside to investigate the sound of metal crunching. My camera didn't catch her license plate, but I knew. I'd known she had a grudge ever since the property line dispute last summer, when I refused to cut down the oak tree that shaded both our driveways. She'd said the falling leaves clogged her gutters. I'd said trees don't respect imaginary lines on a survey map. She hadn't spoken a civil word to me since. I went down to her place that evening. Her yard was immaculate, flowers trimmed, flag waving, bird bath centered like a museum display. She opened the door, before I even knocked. "Evening, Karen," I said. Her lips thinned. "If you're here about your mailbox, I don't know what you're talking about." I didn't mention the mailbox. "I don't care what you think you saw." She started to close the door. I didn't say I saw anything either. She hesitated, eyes flickering just long enough for me to know I'd hit a nerve. I smiled, polite but cold. "You have a good night." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Over the next month, my mailbox was destroyed 4 more times. She was relentless. Some nights it was smashed, others it was ripped clean from the ground. Once, I found it floating in the creek behind my property, flag still upright like a shipwrecked sailor waving for help. At first, I kept rebuilding out of stubbornness. But then stubbornness turned into obsession. It wasn't about the mail anymore. It was about principle. She wanted to make me give up, and I refused. So one morning after yet another wrecked post, I decided I was done playing defense. If she wanted a war, she'd get one. The idea hit me while I was working in my shed. I'm a mechanic by trade, and I've always believed that anything worth building is worth overbuilding. I had leftover steel from an old farm gate, heavy enough to stop a truck. By the time the sun went down, I'd already welded the pieces into a box that could probably survive a small explosion. The post was next, a 6-inch steel pipe, thick-walled, set 3 feet into the ground and surrounded by concrete. I filled the inside with gravel for extra weight, bolted the mailbox on top, and sealed it with weatherproof paint. The thing must have weighed close to 300 pounds. It gleamed like a tank under the porch light. The neighbors noticed. Old Mrs. Dalton across the road said it looked a bit extreme. I told her it was an art project. She laughed, assuming I was joking. That night, I sat on the porch with the lights off, a thermos of coffee in hand, waiting. Around midnight, I heard the low hum of a familiar engine.
Karen's van.
It crawled up the road, headlights off, moving slow. My pulse picked up. I stayed still, hidden in the dark. The van stopped in front of my mailbox. The door opened, and she stepped out with something in her hand, a metal bat. I could hear her muttering as she lined up the swing. "Let's see you rebuild it now." She swung hard. The bat hit the steel with a clang that echoed across the fields. She stumbled, cursed, and swung again. The second hit rebounded so violently that the bat flew out of her hands and clattered onto the pavement. I couldn't help myself, I laughed. It burst out of me, sharp and loud. Her head snapped toward the porch, eyes wide. "You think this is funny?" she shouted. "Funniest thing I've seen all week," I said, standing up and turning on the spotlight. The beam caught her mid-glare, illuminating the scene like a stage play. The bat lay at her feet, and her wrist was already swelling. "You're insane," she yelled. Says the woman vandalizing a mailbox at midnight. She hissed like a cornered cat, jumped into her van, and peeled away, gravel spraying behind her tires. The next morning, I downloaded the footage from my new camera and took it straight to the sheriff's office. This time, they couldn't ignore it. The video showed her face clear as day. "Finally," the deputy said, watching the replay. "Guess she picked the wrong guy to mess with." They charged her with vandalism and trespassing. Small offenses, but enough to get her fined. She had to pay for the damages, ironic considering I didn't have a single dent to fix. For a few weeks, things were peaceful. I started sleeping better. The morning paper arrived without incident. Birds nested on the fence again. I even thought about taking down the extra cameras. Then late one evening, as I was closing up the shed, I smelled smoke. I ran toward the road and saw flames licking up from the base of the mailbox. Someone had poured gasoline on the grass and lit it. The fire hadn't spread far yet, and I managed to stamp it out, but the intent was clear. She was escalating. I called the sheriff again, but by the time they arrived, the fire was gone, and there was no proof who'd done it. Karen's lights were off when they went to her house, but I could see her silhouette behind the curtain, watching. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat on the porch, shotgun across my knees, waiting. Nothing happened. Not that night. Not the next. But I knew she wasn't done. The final showdown came 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday night, full moon overhead. The road quiet except for the sound of crickets. I was inside reading when my security alert pinged. Motion detected. Mailbox area. I checked the live feed and froze. It wasn't her van this time. It was a truck. A big one. The driver backed up slowly, aligning the rear bumper with my mailbox. He revved the engine once, twice, and then slammed into reverse. The impact echoed like thunder. But the mailbox didn't budge. The steel post didn't even sway. The truck, though, its tailgate folded inward like a soda can. Steam hissed from the radiator. The driver stumbled out, clutching a shoulder, and that's when I saw her, Karen, standing a few feet away, watching in disbelief. She'd gotten someone else to do her dirty work. I flipped on every light I had, porch, driveway, floodlights. The place lit up like a stadium. "Nice try, Karen," I shouted. "Looks like you picked the wrong mailbox again." She spun toward me, red-faced, screaming something incoherent. The driver cursed, kicked his ruined bumper, and limped back into the cab. The truck sputtered, coughed, and died halfway down the road. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. They arrested the driver and took statements. Karen pretended she was just an innocent bystander. But between the video footage, tire tracks, and her history of complaints, it wasn't hard for the deputies to connect the dots. They charged her with conspiracy to commit property damage. She spent a night in county jail. When she came home the next day, she wouldn't even look my way. Her house went dark every evening after that. 2 months later, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. By the end of summer, she was gone. Now, when I check the mail each morning, I still glance at that steel box and smile. It stands there like a monument, clean, solid, indestructible. The new neighbors sometimes joke that it looks like something the military built. "Who'd you build it for?" the husband once asked, laughing. "For the last person who underestimated me," I said. He laughed again, not realizing I wasn't joking. Some nights, I sit on the porch with a beer listening to the crickets, watching the road. The light catches the steel, and I think about how that mailbox became more than a box for letters. It became a lesson. People like Karen think they can keep taking pieces of you until you finally give up. They think your patience is weakness, your kindness an invitation. But sometimes, all it takes is one good, unbreakable stand to remind the world that you can't be bullied forever. I didn't build that mailbox out of spite. I built it out of survival, and maybe just a little bit out of satisfaction. Because when someone spends months trying to break what's yours, there's nothing sweeter than watching them destroy themselves instead. And that's exactly what Karen did. Over the next few days, things around my property got stranger. It started small, scratches on my truck door, muddy footprints near my garage, my motion lights going off in the middle of the night with no one there. Then one morning, I found my garden hose running full blast, flooding the flower beds that Sarah had planted years ago. The water had been left on for hours. The soil was ruined. I didn't need proof. I knew who it was. Karen was escalating, trying to make me react, to pull me into the mud with her. But I wasn't about to let her win. I'd lived long enough to know that some battles aren't fought with fists or fury. They're won with patience and planning. So, I waited. I bought new security cameras, 6 of them, high resolution, night vision, all linked to my phone. I hid them under the eaves of the porch, inside the mailbox post, even behind the birdhouse near the road. Every inch of my property was now under quiet surveillance. For a few nights, nothing happened. The air hung heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then, on the 5th night, around 2:30 a.m., motion alert pinged on my phone. The feed showed her, Karen, in her robe, barefoot, creeping across my lawn. She held something in her hand, a jug. When she reached the mailbox, she bent low and poured the liquid around its base. Then she stepped back, struck a match, and tossed it. Flames erupted. I grabbed my extinguisher, ran outside barefoot, and doused the fire. The steel didn't catch, but the grass around it burned black. When I looked down the road, I caught a glimpse of her taillights disappearing into the dark. That was the last straw. The next morning, I went to the sheriff's office. Not the lazy deputy I'd spoken to before, but straight to Sheriff Tully himself. He'd known my father. They used to hunt together back in the day. When I showed him the footage, he whistled low. "That's attempted arson," he said, his face tightening. "You want me to press charges?" "I want her to stop," I replied. "You scare her, fine. But I'm not looking to ruin anyone's life. I just want peace." He nodded, promised he'd have a word, and I went home hoping that would be the end of it. For a week, it was quiet again. Birds sang, the air turned crisp, and the mailbox stood gleaming in the morning sun like a sentinel. I started to relax, even caught myself whistling while working in the shed. Then came the note, folded and tucked under the flag of the mailbox, written in jagged, angry handwriting. "You think you're smart? You'll regret ever moving here." I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. The letters were pressed so hard into the paper that the ink had bled through. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch, shotgun across my lap, coffee gone cold beside me. Around midnight, I heard her again. Her car crept down the gravel road, lights off, engine barely humming. She stopped near my driveway. I leaned forward, watching. She got out slowly, holding something shiny, not a bat this time. A crowbar. I switched on the floodlights. The yard lit up like a stadium. "Enough, Karen," I shouted. She froze, wild-eyed, caught in the bright glare. Her face was pale, almost ghostly. "You don't get it," she screamed, pointing the crowbar at me. That road, that mailbox, they're not even supposed to be yours. This land was ours before your kind came here. Her voice cracked, trembling with something deeper than anger. Bitterness, maybe even grief. Karen, you're trespassing, I said, keeping my voice even. Go home before you make things worse. But she didn't. She lunged toward the mailbox, swinging the crowbar with all her strength. The steel post didn't budge. The sound was deafening, metal against metal, sparks flying into the night. She swung again, screaming, until the crowbar slipped from her hands and clattered onto the gravel. She fell to her knees, panting, defeated. I took a step closer. You're done, Karen. Just then, headlights washed over us both. Sheriff Tully's cruiser. He must have been watching the cameras remotely, just like I had set up access for him. He stepped out, hand on his belt. Mrs. Harper, he said, voice stern. You're under arrest for destruction of property and trespassing. Get up. She looked up at him, her expression collapsing. You don't understand, she whispered. He took what was mine. The sheriff led her to the car, cuffed her gently, and drove off. As the taillights disappeared, I stood there, breathing hard. The night was still again. My steel mailbox stood tall beside me, battered but unbroken, a monument to stubbornness and survival. Part 4. The revelation. For weeks afterward, things finally calmed down. The neighbors stopped gossiping. The mail came on time. I thought it was all behind me, until one morning, a man in a tan suit knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Robert Harper, Karen's brother. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. I came to talk about my sister, he said quietly. I hesitated, unsure what to say. She's the one who started this mess. He nodded. I know, but you should understand why. He told me that the land I lived on had once belonged to their family, decades ago, before my grandfather bought it. Their father had lost it to bankruptcy after the mill closed down. Karen had grown up watching the property from afar, clinging to the belief that one day, it would be theirs again. When I built my house and put that mailbox up, she saw it as a final insult, a reminder that everything she'd ever loved was gone. She wasn't right in the head anymore, Robert said. After her husband died, she started breaking down. The drinking didn't help. I tried to get her help, but she wouldn't listen. I stood silent for a long time. The anger that had burned in me for months suddenly felt small, almost hollow. I didn't know, I murmured. He nodded again, eyes sad. She's in a state hospital now. They say she might recover, but it'll take time. After he left, I sat by the mailbox for hours. The steel gleamed in the sun, solid, cold, and unyielding, the perfect symbol of everything I'd built to protect myself. But now, it just felt heavy. That evening, I went to my workshop and began taking it apart. It wasn't out of pity or guilt, exactly, just understanding. I replaced the steel box with a simple wooden one again, just like the old days, just like the one Sarah had painted. I ran my hand over the smooth surface and smiled faintly. The next morning, I found a single letter waiting inside. No stamp, no address. Just my name, written in shaky handwriting. Inside was a note. Thank you for not giving up on her. I never found out who left it. Maybe Robert. Maybe someone else who cared. But from that day on, no one ever touched my mailbox again. The steel one had survived the war, but it was the wooden one that brought me peace. Sometimes, strength isn't about what you build to stand against the world. It's about what you rebuild, even after it's been torn down. Epilogue. A year later, I still live in that same house, down the same gravel road, with the same quiet mornings and the same view of the rolling fields. The mailbox still stands, wood, paint slightly chipped, flag rusting at the hinge, but it stands. Every now and then I think about Karen. I wonder if she's doing better, if the doctors helped her find the peace she couldn't hear. I even planted a small row of blackberries along the fence line where our properties meet, the same kind she used to pick years ago. Maybe someday, when she comes home, she'll see them and remember that not everything between us was anger. Sometimes, life is just two people on the same road, both trying to protect what they love, and hurting each other along the way. But as I drop my letters into that simple wooden box each morning, I remind myself, forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. And that, I've learned, is stronger than steel.